this video, I'm going to show you how to create macros using relative reference. So there's two ways of recording a macros in Excel. The first method being the one that I have shown you in the previous tutorial. And there's another method called use relative references. And that's what we are going to do now. And I'll also show you how you can manage your macros once they have been created. So of course, we are still working in the workbook that is attached to this section. Just make sure that you have downloaded that workbook from the description of this video. So we'll be working in the sheet 1. The first step with using this next method is placing your active cell in the right position. So what I would like to do is just put my active cell here, and what I would like this next macro to do is to hide certain columns. So the first column I want to see hidden is going to be this C column, and with my cell here on the left, I can now go ahead and start the process. So at first this might be a little confusing, but if you just stick with this, it will start to make sense. So with your cell here, you can just come to the View tab. Now click here on the macros drop down. And now what you need to do is you need to click on Use Relative References. It will disappear, but if you come back to the macros drop down, you can see Use Relative Reference. The icon now has a box around it. It's just an indicator that Use Relative Reference is turned on. Now you can click on Record Macro, and now you can just go through the usual steps of setting up a macro. So first of all, we need to give it a name, which will be hide columns. And for this shortcut, I'm going to make it Control Shift H. And you can give it the same one if you want. Now I'm going to make sure that this is still set to this workbook, and I'm just going to leave the description blank. So once I click OK, my macro will start to record. Now whatever I do, Excel will use this cell as a reference point. What I'm going to do, I'm going to just come to this C column here, right click, and I'm going to hide this column by clicking here. Now I can click on this little square here to stop the macros, or you can just come to this macros drop down and click on stop recording. And that is our macro now created. So now what I can do is, if I want to hide any of these columns, let's say I want to hide this column here, the F column, I would put my cell here and use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl Shift H. And you can see how the column next to the cell is hidden. So let's do it one more time with maybe the initials, this B column here. So I'll just put my cell here. I'll use my keyboard shortcut Ctrl Shift H, and the initials are also hidden. So let's just move on to sheet 3, because there's a small exercise for you to do. As you can see here, we have a number of columns, and in certain columns we have a capital D. What I would like you to do is to use the same method and hide all of the columns with the letter D. If you have created the macro in sheet 1, then you don't need to recreate the macros. You can just go ahead and use it straight away. If you haven't created a macro, then you can practice here. But basically, you need to create exactly the same macro. And like I said, just hide all the columns with the letter D inside of them. So for me, I have already created the macro that I need. So I can just put my cell here next to the column that I would like to hide. Control Shift H, and that column is hidden now. Now I can move on to the next column. That's also hidden now. And I'll do the same with the next column. Control Shift H. And you can see how that's worked effectively. Let's now take a look at how to manage your macros. So to do this, just come to the View tab here and then the Macros drop down, and here we have View Macros. So at this point you should have at least one macro. If not, you should have two, because we have already created a macro that formatted cells, but in any case this is where your macros are kept. And here we have a few options to choose from. First of all, we have run, and this basically just executes your macro itself. So it would be the same as just using the keyboard shortcut that is assigned to the macro. Then we have step into. So this is something you probably will not use unless you know how to use VBA. So if I click on step into, it will open up the VBA console, and what this does for you is it actually debugs your code. It runs one line at a time and tries to find bugs. I've never really used this before, but I do know that this is what it's used for. And like I said, you'll probably not use this unless you know how to write and use VBA. Next we have edit. So if I click here, you can see that this is very similar to the last one, where you can just edit the VBA code. We don't really use it for debugging purposes. The two options you'll probably use the most is delete, which is pretty self-explanatory, and then this options. If you click on options, you can do two things. You can change the keyboard shortcut, and you can edit or give your macro a description. There's one last option here, the create option, and as you can see, it's grayed out. This actually opens up the VBA console, just like edit and step into. You would probably need to know how to write and use a VBA in order to use this option. So that's how you can manage your macros.